Hello survivors and welcome to Eve Hypo, a BioShock podcast by Resident Evil fans for Resident Evil fans. This is First Aid Spray bonus episode 19, and in this edition we journey below the sea to explore the depths of this narrative action, 2006's BioShock. I'm your host Sai, and joining me in Rapture this week, full of fireballs and bees and raring to go, it's Moist Owlet aka James.
Hello!
He protect, but he also attack. First Aid Spray's own Big Daddy, it's Fire Button Steve Valance.
Hello.
Would you kindly record a podcast with us? From Itchy Painty, it's Michael Burger Time Early.
I really don't know why I'm doing this right now.
The subject of this bonus episode, like all others, was voted on by our Patreon backers. Support the show now to not only help keep us afloat, but also create new content, select what that content is, and hear it a month before everyone else. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Check out patreon.com/FASprayPod for the full breakdown. So, shout out first of all, we've got a musical interlude in this episode, as we often have with our bonus episodes, so thank you to Heyde and Frank Tedesco for their piano duet cover of Welcome to Rapture, the piece of music that you hear pretty much straight away when you boot the game up. It's a fantastic little piece, it's a fantastic cover. You can check it out on Frank's YouTube channel, which is Frank Tedesco 7, link is in the description, and you will hear that dropped in midway through our conversation, so thank you to Frank and his friend Zach. So, it is another Pile of Shame podcast. If you've not listened to one of these episodes before, essentially every member of the team has picked a game that they haven't played before, but they feel like they should, or they've at least attempted it and never really got through it. It feels like something that they, is missing from their completion list. That has gone to patrons, and the winning one is BioShock. So somebody on today's panel, at least one person, has never played BioShock to completion. So, we're going to reveal who that is. First of all, BioShock was developed by 2K Games and released in August 2007 for PC and Xbox 360, and then later released for PS3 just a year later. BioShock began its early life as an entry in the System Shock series before it was repeatedly reworked, whilst its core development team shopped for publishers for a few years. Under 2K, the game took shape, and most key perhaps for our podcast, took heavy inspiration from Resident Evil. Bill Gardner, lead developer, has said the team were particularly influenced by Resident Evil 4, including its approach to the environments, combat tools, core game design and tactical elements, its gameplay-fueled storytelling, inventory system, and its opening village level in terms of how it handled the sandbox nature of combat. A demo released before BioShock, which became one of the most downloadable trials in Xbox Live history, which built significant hype. And on release, it had universal acclaim. Destructoid, EGM, Eurogamer, and Game Informer all gave it 10 out of 10. GameSpy gave it 5 stars. GameSpot gave it 9 out of 10. Edge, 8 out of 10, and so on. It won many awards with publications and ceremonies, including Game of the Year with Spike TV's Game Awards and Best Game of 2007 at the BAFTAs. Its Metacritic aggregate scores are super positive, 96 for PC and Xbox, 94 on PlayStation 3, and it has an iOS port which got 68 out of 100, but I think, putting a game like this on a mobile is a challenge anyway, so it's impressive enough. So all that to be said, it's fair to say that this is a well-loved game. We talk a lot about the classics, but with scores like that, this might well be up there as one of the most highly reviewed titles that we've talked about in First Aid Spray history, probably. Let's go right back to the beginning. What was everyone's first experiences with BioShock like? Burger, why don't you start us off? Do you remember playing BioShock?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you play it when it came out?
Absolutely, 100%. I was one of those downloads of the original demo for BioShock. Nice. Absolutely blown away. The first time I had ever seen anything about this game was actually at the... I worked at a company called Game Crazy, which was a pseudo-competitor to GameStop at the time. And we got an early reveal of the initial first-person trailer where the guy takes the drill to the hand. It's a pretty iconic trailer for the game at this point. And absolutely, the lid off of 2000 Store Director's, Vegas Ballroom. But then I played the demo a lot, just the demo, and wow, this is the first game I remember playing on the Xbox 360 that I lost sleep over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice. Steve, did you play it on release, BioShock?
I have I have a bit of a weird history with this one. Basically, at the time of its release, I was a carer, live-in carer with my grandmother, and she didn't have the internet. There is a reason for this story. And I had my PC moved there, so I was living there with an offline PC. I initially bought there was like a steel book with a code to use it online. You could install the game, but it wouldn't activate without being online. I was crushed. I was heartbroken. And then I went and bought the Xbox 360 version, because obviously I still had one of those consoles kicking around. And I had a fun old time playing it with my grandmother watching over my shoulder the entire time. It was lovely.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. She was just recognising the classical tunes and also saying, "It's a bit violent, isn't it, Stephen?" Which is, yes, no.
I don't remember if I owned it or not, to be honest. This is another story of Si's terrible memory. I definitely played it, whether it was someone else's copy or if I bought it on the back of the hype. I don't remember being particularly hyped myself. I remember everyone talking about it and being like, well, this is something that I need to try out. And it certainly looks interesting and unique. But I didn't get very far with it, and I certainly had my own problems with it. So whilst it's a game I've played, it's also kind of a title that's been on my pile of shame because I never finished it. I only got really sort of halfway through. So it's been good to go back to it for me. But yeah, I did play it a little bit on release, and to be quite honest, it didn't quite land with me, and we'll probably get into why that is when we actually start breaking down the game. James, what's your experience with BioShock been before? Because, of course, this is your pile of shame pick.
Yeah, as everybody tells me, why haven't you played BioShock yet? Every time I mention I've never played it. My only experience with it is living, when it came out, I was living with a family member who wouldn't shut up about this game. They absolutely adored it. They played the demo, so maybe we should bring them onto the podcast. They really loved it, and they kept on saying to me, "James, you got to play this game. You got to play this game." But James at the time, guys, you got to understand something. James at the time was playing Dragon Age. There was nothing else that was going to take me away from Dragon Age. But yeah, I'll go into more of it later, but that is the only experience. I had no clue what this game was about. The only thing, because I'm pretty good at avoiding spoilers on things, the only thing I knew was that it was called BioShock. I didn't know any memes from it, nothing. So it was quite an experience to, play it and experience it myself.
That's really cool, considering obviously it's quite an old game, and, it's got some twists and turns, and its storyline and its narrative and stuff like that are something that people have praised since the beginning. So it's really cool that you managed to not know about those, even though I didn't experience them the first time I played it. I probably packed it in before the big turns. I obviously knew all about the memes and stuff when I played it this time, so it wasn't a big shock for me. But let's save story and stuff like that till a little bit later, because it's a rather major thing. Let's kind of start with the gameplay. As previously said, a little bit inspired by stuff like Resident Evil 4. It's quite an interesting one, trying to think about it contextually. Steve, what did you think of the gameplay at the time when you first played it?
Honestly, I was kind of surprised, because at the time, it would have been more of your Call of Duty stock stuff coming into the forefront. So playing a shooter with a more explorative focus and a diminished amount of supplies to then throw you against hordes of screaming crazy people. Yeah, it was a different take. Obviously, I'm more of a classic shooter guy anyway. Like, if you put me in front of a Call of Duty in a Battlefield or Doom or Quake, I'm going for Doom or Quake every time. So I appreciate the fact that it's more labyrinthine. I think the main takeaway for me was, oh, cool, the plasmids burn the ice, so that means I can go through that ice bit now. And other such thrilling concepts like using lightning to operate electrical equipment. So yeah, I was like, oh yeah, I can also electrocute people. Fantastic.
Berger, what do you feel about the gameplay, sort of core beats of BioShock?
So I came into BioShock being a big fan of Deus Ex and System Shock 2 specifically. I thought at the time the fact that you could shoot the water with lightning and there's enemies in it would just kill all the enemies in the water blew my mind. The visuals of the game, even today, James was playing it recently. I was going along with him on his journey through it, and they still hold up well. It's some of the stuff is dated, but no, at the time, blew me away. It was so heavy and weighty, and the sound that your weapons are all chunky, and like when you cocked your shotgun, it looked good, felt good. The mini games were fun. The storyline was great, and like Steve said, it's very labyrinthine, and you did have to double back on it a bit, but you never really felt it. It felt more Metroidvania than I would say than Resident Evil 4 did.
Interesting.
Because
it's interesting because obviously it's got more of a mission structure. I mean, you can go back after a certain point. Obviously, you can go back to previous areas. So I take your point.
It's weird, the comparisons to RE4, because I've got to be honest, just from my recent playthrough of this, I'm not. Maybe I'm just seeing it from the wrong angle, but I'm not seeing it. It's like even the comparison to Deus Ex and stuff. Like I can appreciate the time, and I'm sure Berger will agree with me. It's more in Deus Ex they will be like, you need to get into a building, and there's like 14 different ways you can go into a building. In this, like those extra little nooks and crannies would lead to secrets, not so much gameplay progression. Not so much like getting into the job. The job is you do it this way, but you'll have like 4 or 5 different approaches for combat.
When I make the Deus Ex comparison, it's more of the RPG light elements that I'm talking about. The addition of powers that you can get and unlock as you play, your weapons increasing in power, and mechanics depending on what upgrades you choose to give them. Med kits that you can store and heal up with. So like kind of basic inventory management, RPG light progression mechanics is what I think of when I make the comparison to Deus Ex.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and maybe give Bill Gardner's Resident Evil related quote a bit more of what I think he's trying to say. Anyway, is Steve, of what you touched on there is kind of like the different approaches to combat and that kind of thing. BioShock has over games like you've mentioned, where as big as a fan of something like Halo as I am, it is just pick your favourite gun and hose enemies down a little bit. Whereas Resident Evil 4, you've got limb targeting and stuff like that, and there's a lot of opportunity to interact with the environment in interesting ways that impact your combat, by using ladders and different elevation and being able to jump over fences and stuff like that, which was kind of like a big deal. In Resident Evil 4, not many games had you interact with environment like that. BioShock has a bit of that in the way that you say, like, you can electrocute something if it's all covered in, if it's wet, and there's oil that you can set fire to. And I think it's like that, using the environment in a combat aspect is probably what he's getting at. And you guys are right, because if I think about this, try and think about it contextually at the time, stuff like that is really cool. Like the telekinesis power is a great example. I can't think of many first-person games that had wild powers like that in them at the time. Think about first person.
Oh, it was third person.
Right, sure. I mean, yeah, well, exactly. There you go. Like, when you think about first person games, at the time it was a Call of Duty or a Halo, or the other end, like an Elder Scrolls. This is like a combination of lots of different things from all of those areas in a way, because you've got magic powers and also you have gunplay. James, how did you feel about your experience with the gameplay of BioShock all these years after its release?
I first want to preface with, it wasn't just Dragon Age that kept me away from this game. There were 2 other things. There was a limitation in terms of the system that I had at the time. This game was very intensive on your system at the time, if you didn't have like a console. And I only had an Xbox 360 that at that point wasn't working very well. I'm not sure why. It's working now fine, but it wasn't working
Sounds
very
like
well.
an Xbox 360.
And the other thing was that it was an FPS, and I am historically awful at FPSs. I used to play like an old game called War Rock, which I thought I was very good at, but I wasn't. I was trash. And then, like, I would just play the campaign modes in Call of Duty because I liked the stories in them. I never played PvP, like, in these. And then I think that kind of shaded me a little bit in terms, because that's kind of the gameplay that I didn't really get into until, like, recently with, like, PUBG and Apex, Legends and stuff like that. But yeah, those are the 2 reasons why, because the gameplay itself didn't appeal to me. Now, in terms of like what it is like now, the game, I can see, it has definitely paved the way for a lot of games that have come out in the past 14 years, I think, since it's been released. And, you know, but it still now feels dated. And I know that's very obvious.
Yeah.
Of course it feels dated, right? But when I was playing it, it was quite hard to get into. There was a lot of things that didn't feel very smooth and fluid for me. I mean, it got towards the end where it did feel smooth. Like, I mean, Berger can attest that I basically got to a point where it was like I was playing Resident Evil 6 when I was playing Resident Evil 6 with Steve, and I was playing the Chris and Piers campaign where I was just running into everything and pelting them in the face. That's pretty much all I was doing, because that was the way I played BioShock, I guess. I didn't sneak, I just clobbered people. That's the way I did it. And that's kind of a testament to the game itself and its gameplay and like kind of the versatility of it, because it gives you options to sneak, it gives you options to shoot from afar, and it gives you options to just be a tanky boy who likes to hit things. There's also many other options as well, like just being a puppeteer and stuff like that. Yeah, but my way of playing the game was just hitting people really hard. Yeah, you know, that kind of, for me, that got rid of the frustration of one of the, we'll talk about it more a little bit later maybe, but one of the biggest frustrations was the center of my screen was taken up by quite a lot of real estate.
The dinner plates.
The dinner plates, as I called them. Like, there was some, you know, weapons and stuff that weren't in my way. Like, I think the revolver had a tiny one, and I think like the wrench only has a crosshair, right? But, you know, when you got the grenade launcher, stuff like that, the shotgun, it has a huge dinner plate in the middle. They made it really hard for me to play, which is why I just defaulted to the wrench.
You have about flavor text crosshairs and things for your weapons, James. Am I just
exactly? Yeah,
right,
yeah. Sorry, yeah. For context, the crosshairs I played the BioShock remastered. And I got a lot of people giving me feedback saying you should be able to turn it off, but it was nowhere in the options. Couldn't find a mod to even get rid of it either. So that kind of lessens my experience a little bit. But, you know, when you got a wrench in hand and you're a really, really strong boy, you can just hit things. So I did that. Yeah, I liked the ingenuity. Like, I think it's probably of its time. Since then, I played a lot of games that kind of use the elements. But of its time, really, really awesome. To see them using different elements in the game to get progression. Like, there was a point where I got stuck, and it's because I didn't read a certain audio log, and it was to do with burning the ice so you could progress into the fisheries place.
Oh yeah, you can use fire and it melts ice. Pretty good. Sorry, just
exactly,
back to earlier, Steve.
And the thing is, I missed that audio log, so I got lost. I didn't know what to do, and then folks in chat said, "Oh yeah, you just use fire on the ice." I'm like, "Wait, this game had that?" I was pretty impressed with that. It was pretty cool. But yeah, I think all the other points have been made. But yeah, I really like the variation of gameplay style you could do in this game.
That's cool. I agree. It's a tricky one because in general, it's really hard to put yourself in the context of the time of a release sometimes. And we take a lot of that stuff for granted, I suppose, which unfortunately means that you're quite right. On my recent playthrough, I found that, I don't know, it felt a little bit dated, it felt a little bit stunted, it felt a little bit bare bones compared to a lot of games. And that's because it's influenced so many games. So, it's a difficult thing because it can't really just easily chastise it for being lesser than all the games that, for lack of a better term, ripped it off. But unfortunately, it does kind of like pale compared to stuff that we've had since.
Steve.
Oh, sorry, go back.
I do want to comment a little bit on that. Like that was James. I didn't mention I was watching him play through the game recently, and I noticed that was a big part of the challenge because of how dated the game is. We've played so many great games that fit in that same genre, that same hole, like Prey, for example, or Dishonored.
Sure.
Both games that took that mold and kind of iterated it in a way that took what was there that was good, added their own things to make it better, and kind of left some of the older, more obsolete systems. But still, like, there's a reason you follow the greats. You stand on the shoulders
right, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And like the games you've mentioned there, Prey and Dishonored, are absolutely prime examples of like still seeing the BioShock DNA for sure. But there's one thing that those games don't have, and this does, which is the Pipe Mania game, which is fun all the way through, to be honest. I'd say it never gets old. It got frustrating at times because of the way that it was like, here's your difficulty warning for this hacking minigame. And they didn't make much sense to me most of the time because they were like, oh, this is really hard. Look, it's a big, large field of things to move. Well, this one's easy because it's really small. It's like, well, no, the small ones are actually harder because I don't have any room to move. But okay. But still, the hacking minigame, I thought at the time when it came out was a stroke of genius. And I still really, really enjoyed it personally. It's a tiny little thing, but like a little highlight of the game that I still feel holds up. Steve, what's your experience been recently playing the game on this most recent playthrough?
Oddly cathartic, like for reasons that don't make sense. Like I'm appreciating the fact that I have an entire arsenal just carrying with me, like Doom. I'm appreciating that the battle arenas tend to be quite spacious with lots of things to move around and barrel around and smash things with. And the fact that it's very forgiving. Like, obviously, the Vita Chamber thing, which is a thing you can turn off, which allows you to basically survive death for $14 or $0 if you run out of dollars. It's incredibly forgiving that the game will kill you outright and then let you get straight back into the fight.
Yeah.
But no, I appreciate the arena battles with the fact that you can carry so many things into the battle and still try and be tactical and place, like, traps with your proximity mine or your crossbow wires. It's inventive, which is a shame because 9 times out of 10, Steve's solution, at least on this playthrough, was I'm going to zap him and whack him. And boy, did the Electrobolt and the wrench get a lot of use. Like it's a catch-all solution that the starting melee weapon should be quite so devastating, but it just makes the right crack, And spoilers for later on, but there's this one particular point where the Waltz of the Flower plays. And timing the smacks of a wrench to the face of a deformed crackhead to the high notes of a classical piece have stained me forever. Like, I will forever remember those moments where I'm just swinging a wrench around like a maniac. So yeah, there's lots of fun guns and stuff, but yeah, melee's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys have talked about the different ways that you can approach this combat-wise, because I personally found the gunplay feels pretty obscenely unsatisfying.
Yeah.
It's not just unsatisfying, but just really, really unsatisfying, which in a way can be a good thing because it makes you consider other options. Like, it felt like the game was going, yeah, but look at the wrench. You don't have to worry about all those ammo counts if you're just smacking things with the wrench. So my playstyle, as you kind of mentioned with the sort of Vita Chamber where you die and just basically instantly come back, and it's not like you're resetting a checkpoint or anything. It just carries on. You can just crawl back into the fight that you were midway through. Death is essentially a joke in this, which is, depending on your viewpoint, it could be a good or a terrible thing. It very easily let me just turn my playstyle into complete brute force, where I was just like, oh, I died, get back out again, scrap a little bit more health. Oh, I died, get back out again. which is fine and dandy until some of the later chapters where the spawn tubes are really far away from, where you potentially were and they're a bit more spaced out. Yeah. Then it got really frustrating. But I guess maybe that's on me. But at the same time, is it? Because the game made that such an option for me up until the last couple of chapters. But there you go. Berger, I'm going to send you off down a rabbit hole. What do you think of the big daddies?
Oh, I love them. In terms of a big bad, they don't really feel trivialized until the very end of the game.
For sure.
They do end up... Well, let me rephrase that. Depending on the choices that you make throughout the game, in terms of whether or not you choose to harvest the Little Sisters or save them, which is a big moral dilemma that you face throughout the course of BioShock's storyline. But it is a core game mechanic because it's about resource management at that point. If you choose to kill Little Sisters, the game gets trivialized pretty early, I think, in the game overall. But if you save them, you also get side bonuses. But there's enough variety. I think there are 2 or 3 different ones at least. There's the big melee one with the drill. There's the rivet, the rosies. And is there a third one, or is it just the 2?
I want to say there's rosies, there's bouncers, and then elite variants for both. Yeah, and then BioShock 2 throws in a few extra ones.
Right. And you get the big sister in BioShock 2.
Yeah.
So it always felt like, oh, there's a big daddy here. Do I have what it takes to take this guy down right now? Or do I want to go, do I need to go get some electric buckshot or something before I can do this? No, awesome enemies. Really, really glad. And I'll say that for most of the, the named characters that you fight in this game as well.
I agree, actually, completely. Throughout pretty much the entire game, coming across a big daddy was always like, oh, why now? It's like, oh, I'm not equipped for this. But you need to, if you want to play it a certain way, if you want to salvage them all or save them all, you have to fight all of those big daddies. And I went on a pure save them all run to get the super good ending. So I was like, well, I have to do this. And my whole I'm going to keep dying until I win thing kind of became its own problem there as well, because big daddies eventually might go away. That is a potential thing. So I was going up and I was doing the damage that I could. I knew it was going to kill me. There's no way around it. And then you have to run to the big daddy and try and carry on, which was kind of fun in its own way.
I'm just mental image of a maniac charging through Rapture, like that one bit in Star Wars with Han Solo's chasing the stormtroopers, screaming with a wrench, only to then see a big baddie appear and chase Sai all the way around.
Running around with a wrench and my hand on fire.
Yeah. In regards to the big daddy and tracking them all down too, I actually have an embarrassing admittance to make. I didn't know until I saw it on James's screen that it tells you the number of big daddies in the zone on the pause screen.
Yeah, handy hint, that one.
I also, I just want to interject and say I appreciate the fact that these are the hands down, excluding maybe the final boss, the biggest, most iconic threat in the game. And they are optional, technically. And you can take your time and prepare around them. You can just see them lumbering around and they'll sort of not bother you until you pick a fight. I appreciate the fact that this big, monstrous beast is also like, yeah, you're right, mate. While you've got, maniacs running around left and right, trying to paste you at the first thing they see. Like, the fact that it gives you this big, tough foe and right, dismantle him, figure it out. It's just a shame that then the Vita Chamber, like Sai says, allows you to just chip him to death with wrench hits.
Yeah. Although, I mean, it's funny, I didn't want to necessarily spoil my conclusion on this, but I came in with a lot of sourness and some issues with this game, but the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, that's so cool. Because, again, 2007, I can't imagine many games were doing the thing where it's like, here, you've got multiple different types of enemies that also you can kind of pit them against each other. You can take a big daddy and be like, you're mine now, kill all these random dudes for me and stuff like that. Or you could struggle against two different types of enemies at the same time. But you're right.
Hell, even Splicers.
Not to go back to Resident.
Sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Splicers will pick fight the big daddies.
Yeah, exactly that. It's like, you've got all these different variables. And it's easy for us to go, it's like Resident Evil, but I can't think many of other franchises where they have, constantly reappearing enemy types like this. Even this isn't really anything like that. This is so original, and you don't see it very often, like you say, of just, the most threatening and iconic enemy is something you could fight, you can completely avoid, whatever you want to do with it. Which is really cool.
It is always fun to watch them pick a fight. Watching Splicers pick a fight with a big daddy. Just on the sidelines, watching him literally go to town on them.
Yeah, it's great.
It's just a catharsis watching him literally act like a cartoon villain and just bash them left and right. And then, okay, they've softened you up, and then he beats me in one shot.
James, what was your experience with the big daddies, and which ending did you wind up going for, or did you know about that at all?
No, I didn't actually. I'm actually very curious about what ending I got, because can I talk about the ending I got?
Yeah, let's save
all right. I'll wait that for later. So I mostly because I wanted to experience the story, and also I got nothing to prove. Don't at me. I played this game on easy.
Yeah, for sure.
And so
you didn't play the real game, James.
Exactly. Yeah. Hello. I 100%ed Elden Ring. Get off my back. I always say that. But I did like the big daddies. I played it on normal, but there were some things I just wasn't getting. And then I decided if I'm going to play it with Berger as my co-pilot, I would play it on easy just to have a simple narrative experience. And
for sure.
The big daddies, they were still super out of all the enemies in that game, I tell you what, actually, I told a lie earlier. The only other thing I knew about BioShock were the big daddies, and that was simply, I didn't know what they were called, but I knew what they looked like because they're on the freaking front cover. You know, I looked into like the development. They went through so many changes about what they were planning to put in as the big bad. And in my opinion, they're actually the like icon of the game. Like,
absolutely.
There is even the end boss. There is nothing, because the end boss is basically meant to be like a surprise. So, but yeah, the big daddies are like the pinnacle of that game in terms of villains. And well, they're not even villains, but we'll get into that later on with stories. Yeah, and I really like them. I also did the same thing as I did, with everything else. I shocked it and then I pelted it to death with a wrench. I basically just danced around the thing while I watched while I listened to the little sisters helplessly crying.
Mr. Bubbles,
listen. Them crying, like it did something to me. I don't like children, but man, I didn't want to upset them. But man, they had Adam, I needed it. They were protecting the Adam. I needed it. Yeah, really cool design. They could have. I would really love to have been in that writing room when they were like doing the design for them, or the designer room when they were doing the design for them, because they are recognizable, but they're not. They have something unique about them. Yeah, sure, you can see that helmet. It's like a French diving suit from the 1900s, etc. But they're also not human. You can tell that. Like, and I think that's I love that kind of design.
There's still an air of mystery to them, isn't there, even today?
Yeah. And I think that's great. I think I love a little bit. I mean, being a DM, I love vague. It's basically what I do. Yeah, and it gets people talking. And yeah, we actually spoke a little bit about the Big Daddies when I was streaming it. Yeah, super cool villain. Love them.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about the bees. Which,
we can talk about the bees if you want.
I mean, it's just the different, not specifically the bees, but the different plasmid abilities.
Plasmids.
There were so many in the game that you could take control of enemies, you could take control of turrets, you could take control of. I think you can make enemies fight each other, not take control. You could just make them mad at each other. You could shock them with lightning, burn them with fire, throw ice bolts at them.
And that's even those are the offensive ones, but there's a ton of other stuff to make it easier to hack, to make shock prices go down, to make alarms last time and that kind of. So there's so much so many options
tuning,
there, which is really cool.
Yeah, the powers were really cool and fun to engage with. Like the bees are another iconic BioShock. They play that trailer I mentioned earlier. They're in that trailer. It's like one of the first spells he uses.
Yeah,
such a mad thing. Sorry,
I was just gonna say I really appreciate a game that makes me actually care about money and stuff, and I constantly or rather maybe not money, but you use the Adam obviously to unlock abilities and things like that. Or give yourself new slots to put those abilities in. And it made me care about that because I was like, oh, I can give myself a few more slots and use more of these things that I've been collecting. But yeah, sorry, go on, Steve.
I say it's appreciation for the madness that is let's just make it so they can shoot bees. And, this is a game with your three core elements of fire, ice, electricity. And then you've got sonic boom Hadoukens on the ground, like mines. What was it? The gravity gun from Half-Life, essentially telekinesis. Would you say, Berg?
Telekinesis.
Yeah. It's a nice menagerie, and then you've got all your should we say mental control powers. I mean, mind control of Big Daddy, enrage, security. It's surprising how much that opens up options, which is a shame because I still gravitated towards electricity most of the time.
Electricity,
variety versus versatility.
I tell you what, so I was complaining earlier about the game not really surprising me much because of it being 14 years later, but the telekinesis thing did surprise me. Because even nowadays, whenever you hear the word telekinesis, it's a very one-dimensional thing. Like, people just think, oh, I can just push things over, I can push things away, right? But in this game, you can catch whatever is thrown at you and throw it back at them. Like, and that was really, really cool. I mean, it has been done, but I wasn't expecting that from a 2008 game.
Yeah.
It was really cool. Like, when I remember when I got the telekinesis and I found the tennis ball launcher, and I was like, oh, you're a bad one. You're going to throw rockets at me or something. And I started expecting it and going around it, and it didn't do anything. I was like, huh, why is this here? And I think it was labeled tennis ball launcher, right? And then I looked down the thing. This is the great, like, kind of level design they did for certain things. Because then I looked down the range and I was like, oh, this is actually a range for something. Then I went to the other end, and then I saw that there was a plasmid there for telekinesis. And then there's a big fat button right in front of you, basically saying, try me. And also an audiobook to tell you what telekinesis was from I can't remember his name now, but the
Dr. Suchong.
That's the guy. Telling, like, there's a lot of little plasmids like that. The important plasmids, there was a lot of, like, little story and immersive elements like that that helped you kind of get, like, use these plasmids and get what they can do. I used telekinesis a lot. Like, the amount of times I picked up a fire canister or something and just threw it at somebody and it exploded, super satisfying.
All right, let's move a little bit along to some of the atmosphere and aesthetic of the game. Let's talk a little bit about the visuals of BioShock. Like you, James, I played the remastered version, if that's what it's called, on PlayStation. I think it's the PS4 version. Overall, I'd say that this is probably the highlight of the game for me. I still think the game looks pretty good. Rapture is a really cool location. It looks really cool. I particularly like... It's funny because, so for an underwater city, it's quite easy to forget that you're underwater sometimes. So it's nice that it breaks it up and kind of hits you over the head with it very briefly, where you go through these, like, tubes between buildings that are completely outside, which feels great. And it also doesn't overdo that. Like, you have these moments and you're like, this is awesome. And you just move on, and then, like, hours later, you might get another one. In general, I thought the variety was pretty good with the visuals. And for the time, very unique, and still quite unique, because that sort of, like, 1950s sort of steampunk thing, people say they love it, but it never really sticks around. Fallout's done it pretty successfully, but nobody has made any, like, franchise using steampunk that's really connected and really stuck around. And, you know, obviously this has it around its periphery. It's not too overbearing with it, but obviously it's a major part of it. You know, Art Deco, very nice. Berger, what do you think of the visuals of BioShock and how they hold up in 2022?
Absolutely stunning. I still remember the first time I played the demo. And for those who may not have played BioShock or listening to this podcast, one of the first scenes in BioShock is you go into an elevator effectively, and then you listen to a presentation by the game's antagonist, Andrew Ryan, and then he reveals Rapture to you, and it blew me away. It was just like, I got chills, like goosebumps, and it's such an iconic, beautiful scene. To see that, I got those same goosebumps when I was watching James play the game again a few weeks ago, and, you know, it's like, no, it belongs to God, so can a man not choose? And, you know, Rapture, he does this thing, and then, boom, chills, like, as soon as that goes up. And then it does a good job, too, of showing how massive Rapture is.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, like you said, when you're inside Rapture, they do a great job of showing you this, you could forget that you're underwater sometimes. But then there's there's a lot of really small reminders that you're underwater. Like, there's a lot of wet spots on the carpet. There's a lot of leaks on the walls. Yeah. A lot of rust and, like, I don't want to say decay. Maybe might not be the right word, but it's the environments and the visual style of the game do such a great job of, like, beyond just the level design, it's visual storytelling. Because there's...
Yes, very well said.
Like, there's so much of just walking around Rapture where you don't know what's happening. You're coming into this, like, not knowing what's going on. You know that there was a party at some point like a New Year's Eve party, but then you find out that party wasn't actually this New Year's Eve, but like one a couple ago, back before they found Adam and before it, like societal collapse. And no, I think it's like you said, it's the high point. It's what makes BioShock worthy of this episode of the podcast, I think.
Yes, environmental storytelling is something that I hadn't even written down, but you're so right. This game is absolutely rife with it. Steve, how do you feel about the way BioShock looks?
Aesthetically, like excluding, and there's a big exclusion, the character models of anything bar a Big Daddy, aesthetically excluding those, I think it's a fantastic little thing. Like the environments, as my colleagues said, that they all look rather stylish and Art Deco, and there's not an exhaustive overuse of underwater vistas. Regarding environmental storytelling, most places have they look like they would have been at one point opulent, but are now corroded, rusted, and falling apart, or covered in blood. And yeah, I would say that as is the nature of these kind of games, and the fact that you've got to explore every nook and cranny to get all the supplies you need, that there's a lot of environmental storytelling. Most rooms are unique in some way, shape, or form, and have a small story to tell, even if it is, and that person died, which is the usual ending of someone in Rapture. But yeah, no, it's got... obviously, when I think of Art Deco, my brain gravitates directly towards the opening shots of the Batman show, the original Batman animated series. And seeing that, but now it's all rusted green and underwater, it works. It just works. Like, even the guns and stuff aren't like your traditional modern day for the era guns. They all look like Art Deco revolvers and shotguns, and then you've got steampunk grenade launchers bolted on top and stuff like. Basically, if it's not looking like Art Deco architecture, it looks like diving gear has been converted into a weapon. If that makes any sense, especially the grenade launcher looks like something that's made out of like a diving helmet stretched out. And yeah, lots of what's the word? Not typography. That's text, but like. That kind of mindset has been put through the entire game. Like, it's got its own language of visual language, Steve. We'll just go with that. And the fact that it's consistent the entire way is pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty strong. And you take a screenshot from this game, particularly one, say, with a outdoor vista, people are 9 times out of 10 going to know it's BioShock. It's that unique and striking.
Yeah.
Character models, however, are dire. Just to swing it back round, excluding the big daddies, most character models are, even for the era, kind of janky. They hide it with masks and using environmental storytelling that way, so everyone is like, normally wearing some kind of masquerade outfit to try and hide their deformed visage, but it doesn't change the fact that they are rough to look at.
Also, a lot of the lighting, too, is helpful for them hiding how bad the enemy design are. I'll agree with Steve. Like, the enemy design of the splicers is generally pretty poor.
Yeah, just mishmashed, sour, plasticine model faces. Not great.
James, what did you think of the visual design of BioShock?
It's beautiful. Like, when I first started up, and the first thing you want to look at, because you're in the ocean, and the first thing you want to look at is the giant lighthouse-looking object in the middle of the ocean, and they know that. Like, the developers know that, and they want you to look at it. They want you to look at all the work they put into that. And then you look around you, and there is some of the best-looking water I've seen in a video game. And it is... I feel like it's a testament rather than a takeaway when developers or film, they use darkness and lighting to accentuate something. And they did with the water. Like, I'm sure if there was a blazing sun in the sky, that water wouldn't look as good. But they did really well with it. The fire, it was passable.
Right,
and
video game fire.
Yeah, it's very hard to do, especially at that time. In fact, I still don't think there's really a game that's done it super duper well, even up to this point. Yeah, and then you walk in, and it is, the environment immediately has its own stamp on it. You immediately get kind of the world you're entering. I got a note down. It reminded me of Dwarven architecture, in a way. I know that sounds strange to say, and I mean in a fantasy sense. And if folks have watched Lord of the Rings here, you'll know what I mean by that. It's very angular. It's very, and when I say this, it's thick. And
is that with two C's?
Exactly. And heavy. Everything feels like it's quality. Like, and you got that, it's just mesh on a wall, right? But you got that when you walked into that lighthouse. I'm actually not sure if it is a lighthouse. I just assumed it was. Yeah, and that first entrance of what it was one of the best kind of entrances to a game that I've played. One of the biggest kind of surprises to the game was just the beginning of it for me. Yeah, and as you go through, like I want to talk about, because we have kind of slated the splices a little bit, and deserved. They did kind of look a little bit weird, but they did, as Berg said, they used lighting. The other thing they used, and masks, the other thing they used is movement to hide. They made you uncomfortable so you didn't look at them. Right? I didn't want to look at the splices because they terrified me. I wanted them to be dead as soon as possible. I was playing mainly with my wrench, so like I was up close and personal with these things, but I wanted them dead. The way they moved, like I think the first cutscene, and this game has barely any cutscenes, which is another, plus or minus. But the first cutscene you see is you get knocked out, and Big Daddy comes over with the little sister, and the little sister calls you an angel, or no, you haven't become an angel yet. She says, and when the splicer comes down to your face and it just moves around like a puppet. Like it was, it sent shivers down my spine. Yeah, it was creepy. And they do that all the way through the game, even in gameplay. And I thought that was just a really good way to kind of hide the fact that they didn't have the greatest models, because I just wanted them dead. And then, like, I think probably my favorite, in terms of visuals, we can all go around the table with this, but in terms of my favorite place, I think it had to be the I can't remember the name of it right now, but the entertainment zone.
Oh, Fort Frolic.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. I really like the plant place, but Fort Frolic, I don't know why I like, because that kind of environment sets my anxiety off. I don't want to be near a bunch of people and like entertainment places and stuff like that. But I don't know why I love that place so much. Like there's so much. Oh, I think I do know why actually. It's because there's so much color in it, and I always talk about, especially in like the original RE games, for instance. There's so much color, and I love poppy colors. And in Fort Frolic, there were so many colors in my face, and I was like, "Whoa!" And then you're met with this really weird guy who just, the show must go on, etc., etc. Great way to tell the story. And as soon as you enter, you see like these wax figures, his art piece to your left. You're like, what the heck? Is that something I have to interact with? No, not right now. You have to interact with that later. There's like some foreshadowing, as well done visually, within the game. There's a bunch of stuff like that in this game. A bunch of like little secrets I found just by looking at something and going, oh, what if I do something here? And then suddenly I've got a plasmid, or I've got a safe with stuff in it. It wants you to explore, and I love games like that. They visually, it wants me to go out and go through that door and explore and see what's there, and you will be rewarded. And I know I've mentioned Elden Ring once, but it's kind of what Elden Ring does as well. Like, I'm not going to talk about Elden Ring, but it's more games should do that. They should, if you explore, you don't get like a one stim, and that's it. Like, you get a reward for it. You get a plasmid, you get an upgrade, you get a slot.
Or nightmare fuel. Right, there's plenty of nightmare fuel secrets.
For real. And it's not like upgrades in BioShock were small either. Like, every upgrade you get is huge.
Yeah, they look great as well.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the like Max Fleischer style cartoon stuff where they give you a little intro like, this is incinerate, use it to incinerate people. While you've got a cartoon man setting a lady's cigarette on, like, as opposed to burning them alive.
It did remind me of Fallout a lot. Those little videos that they were doing. I don't know what came first. Did those videos come before
Fallout's
Fallout?
90s. Like Fallout 1 and 2 still had that style in the 90s.
Right. So they must take an inspiration from that because it's very similar in terms of art style. Like I saw the Pit Boy in every single video. Every single one that popped up. But yeah, I mean, overall, like, visuals stunning for its time and still is stunning.
For sure. Yeah, completely agree. All the things you've just said about it being a game that rewards you for actually taking the time to look around and appreciate it, which is always nice. And not really thinking about it before, but that intro being a big surprise for you, that's always nice. It's one of those things where it's like, you'll always remember where you were and you experienced such and such a gaming moment. And I think if this game has a moment, there's a couple of them that are up for grabs in discussion, but I know that opening scene is a big, big deal. You know, a lot of people loved that when it came out, and it had a huge impact on sort of like games as art or whatever, you know, that kind of conversation, games as cinema. And why wouldn't it? You know, it's a great way to kick off a game with the introduction to Rapture. Let's talk about the audio on the other end of the spectrum then. I'll also start with this one as well. Why not? I would say this is probably my least liked part of the game, perhaps.
Oh, thank goodness.
It doesn't have much of a soundtrack. What it has is quite unremarkable, I think, outside of that intro scene particularly. I didn't find any of it particularly memorable or present. I don't even remember if there was music. It's been a few weeks now. You do get the old-timey 50s music you hear in the background very occasionally. You know, personal taste doesn't really do anything for me, so it's not going to stick in my brain at all. It's not my kind of thing. The voice acting is, you know, stellar pretty much across the board, very engaging. Atlas and, you know, the whole arc of his character is very well performed. Again, you get all these collectible diaries that you can listen to. That's really nice. Obviously, it adds to the story, and they're all very well done as well. It's nice when you're actually able to hear them over the gameplay, which isn't all the time, because accidentally you'll pick one up in the middle of a never-ending firefight and just be like, well, okay, never mind. Some of the sound effects got incredibly annoying. Welcome to the circus of values.
Kill your cravings and the circus of value.
Yeah, that. It's great character, but it's really boring after a while. That being said, some of the sound effects I thought were particularly iconic, like actually activating and doing stuff with the machines and the hacking. Those kind of sound effects are I remembered them from when the game came out. I haven't touched this game since the release sort of year, and booting up and playing it, hearing that sort of like the juddering of those machines and stuff was like, yeah, That's what I remember about BioShock. Those sound effects are very iconic, to me particularly. Steve, what do you think of the audio in BioShock?
Much like yourself, musically, I think it's lacking. It's got, like, the intro to Rapture's great. Waltz of the Flowers doesn't count. It's licensed Tchaikovsky music.
Right.
And the rest of it's kind of mid. There's some old-timey stuff in there. I'm pretty sure there is actually some crossover with other music from Fallout. Maybe not Set the World on Fire, but possibly. There's sometimes when the splices have, like, ambient dialogue that I want to just bring up. In Resident Evil 4, we have obviously got the advantage of not really knowing the intricacies of Spanish quite as much as some people. Or in Resident Evil 6, the Juavo speaking various languages that we may not necessarily natively speak. I feel like the splicers are our counterpart to that as English speakers, which is irritating because the amount of times I heard "Jesus loves me, yes I know,"
oh God, yeah,
over and over and over again was starting to grate a little. Like the voice recording itself was quality, but hearing the same ambient lines from certain splicers over and over again started to grate towards the end game. Audio logs are fantastic. Like, there's that extra little bit of detail that is, like, bleeding through from its lineage. For example, like, Andrew Ryan always has the same background noise, and most people have background noise appropriate to where they are when they recorded it, which I think is a fantastic little touch. Vocal performances are solid as well, across the board. I think the only one that makes me wince a little is Tenenbaum, the German scientist who progressively gets more and more of a cartoonish lilt-to accent as the game goes on.
Yeah, sure.
Same with the true big bad, who I'm not going to spoil until we get there. I feel like they are so on the nose, cliche mob boss that's a bit crap. Like they could have kept the other iterations and it would have been stronger for me. Standout performance still goes to Armin Shimmerman as Andrew Ryan. Like, I may not agree with that man's politics at all, but my God, if I don't pay attention when he's speaking.
Yeah, for sure.
Extremely great performance there. Yeah, all the sounds, bells and whistles are what you would expect them to be in a shooter. I particularly like the punchiness of the shotgun and the sound of lightning leaving my hand. And the thwack of a wrench upon a person's head is surprisingly satisfying, as I said earlier.
What about the bees?
And the bees. Oh, God. Oh, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah! Sorry. The bees are authentically irritating. So, yes.
Logan, what do you think about the audio presentation of BioShock?
I mean, it feels like a lot of what there is to be said about the audio in BioShock has already been said. This is one of those moments where I hadn't played BioShock or analyzed it critically since I played it 14, 15 years ago. When James was playing it again, and there's a lot of points in the game with just no sound happening, or there is a sound and it's just like the droning of, like, I guess the sound of that's what being underwater sounds like, because there's like ambient hum of varying volume. That was the other thing that James and I noticed is on the remastered version, the audio doesn't sync right. Like, it's not measured for distance, so if there's an enemy in the same...
It's the distance, yeah.
Yeah, if there's an enemy in the same zone as you, you'll hear it as if they're right next to you, even if they're down the other end of the hallway.
Yeah.
Which really took me out of it. But, like Steve says, Andrew Ryan is such a... We talked about the intro to this game a lot already, but that opening cinematic, that opening... When he's talking about why he created Rapture, and it's this audio, like this like automatic thing that's just playing because you're entering, it's compelling. It makes you want to see what he's created. It makes you want to experience. So, and then I'll say the same thing for a lot of the other performances, barring like Steve said, some kind of like slippage of like characterization as you get into the later game for some of the characters. Every time somebody talks that's not physically in the space with me, or on an audio log, I should say. Anytime there's an audio log, I want to hear the next one. I want to know what happens to those two people who are looking for their kid. I want to know what happens to Dr. Suchong. I want to know what happens to everybody. Like, I want to know what happened to I want to know what happened on Rapture. And while the generally speaking, the audio design is not great for that, at the very least, you do have those tidbits. We'll get more into that in the story segment, but yeah.
Yes, it's funny that you say about the distance thing. I hadn't thought about it. It relates back to the Jesus Loves Me thing that you mentioned, Steve. I had a splicer that was, singing along to himself for literally minutes. I couldn't find the guy. I had no idea where he was. And the fact that the audio was like a consistent volume no matter where you are really didn't help. He was going on and on and on for minutes.
That is probably a remastered thing. That and Posh Lady of "Don't you disrespect me!" Those two are the most common irritants vocally.
And Berger, what you're saying about sort of like a lack of sound, you're absolutely right. So this is so inside baseball. My sound bath, my TV is a second-hand piece of crap thing that needs replacing, most certainly. It has an issue where if it's not detecting much, it kind of just stops. It goes, I guess there's nothing going on, I'll just go to sleep. And that can be irritating through, many movies that have their quiet turns and stuff like that. But none more have I had an issue with something other than BioShock. Like, that's the one most where I've had to turn it off and back on again because it's just shut off. I can tell that it's shut off because there was a hum there before, but it's so low that the soundbar is just like, I'm not interested. So you're right, this game could be very quiet. Not necessarily a bad thing, just an observation. James, what do you think of the audio in BioShock? I know we've covered a lot of it, but any highlights and lowlines?
I really like the sound that when the wrench hits people. Smiles.
Hey, that's mine.
It sounded real good.
All right, cool.
I also, as Berger said, like one of my biggest complaints was hearing something and then turning around and then there's nothing there. And what makes it even worse is that you have Houdini enemies in the game who fly around and teleport from one place to the next, right? And not only are you hearing them giggle and saying what they're saying, but you're also hearing the whoosh of their teleporting ability, right? And those they're two different audio tracks, and sometimes they don't sync up. So you're just like, well, I don't know where you are now. Like you could be at it. You could be up my butt. I don't know. Like, I eventually, I think I took enough photographs of them where you slow down their teleport, you get a better idea where they're teleporting to, so it's a bit easier to kill them. But yeah, it was, at some points, the audio was the reason. You don't realize, actually, as I was playing it, I started to realize how much I rely on audio in video games, especially like that in first-person stuff. I mean, coming from playing a game like Resident Evil 8 Village, which has spectacular audio in terms of directional, right, and where everything is, to play BioShock, which, I saw it night and day. I was like, well, I'm just going to hit things and use it. You were talking about guns earlier on. Guys, there was no other gun in the game than the shotgun. There was no reason to use anything else.
I mean, the Tommy gun was there, but only when the shotgun was empty would it be used.
Right. No, I just used a wrench. Come on. Just go back to old faithful. Great point by Berger as well with the no sound. Yeah, there was just a vast lack of sound.
Looking online, doing a quick leg of the servers and things on Steam, and it generally seems to be a consensus that the updated BioShock the Collection versions are actually inferior for sound quality. Like the stereo stuff was apparently more present in the original. So this may be an advisor if you're a listener to the podcast and you're still interested in BioShock. Get the old versions, not the new versions.
The old one, yeah. Because people were saying to me also that apparently they remembered the old version either having smaller. Sorry to go back on a previous point, but they had smaller crosshairs, or you could just remove them entirely in the old version. So it'd be cool to get some people's feedback on that to see if you have the old version, see if there is an option for that. Because I might actually buy the game if the older version. Voice acting spectacular. I said to Berger right at the beginning, and we were going to get into it in a second, but due to the way that Atlas was talking to me and was making me do things, just his voice actor, I didn't trust him. I said, didn't I say that to you, Bergs? I was like, I don't trust this guy. I don't believe anything he says. But at the same time, he was saying stuff sometimes that was making me go, huh? But yeah, the voice acting. Andrew Ryan, obviously, big, leader of the pack when it comes to voice acting. But I think the Atlas dude was, or the Atlas persona was fantastic as well, because I was constantly trying to figure him out just through his voice alone.
Cool. Okay, that nicely brings us to story then, I guess. Obviously, we touched on little bits and pieces. BioShock set in the fictional underwater utopia of Rapture in 1960. The player character winds up going down into there after a plane crash and sort of getting swept up in this sort of post-crisis version of the city, which has discovered some leaps forward in science that kind of wind up destroying their society, essentially, as people fight over all these new abilities that they can now implant in their body and that kind of thing. I'm going to throw to you, James, first to talk about the story, as you've never experienced it at all at this point. I guess the cuffs are off. What did you think of BioShock's plot?
I did not know what to expect. I was like, there was a lot of points in this story where I was like, where's this going? Why is this man so stupid? Why does he keep doing these silly things? I didn't get it. Like, he goes into, like, but you're the whole game is about foreshadowing. The whole game, every corner, foreshadowing everywhere. Like, I remember one of my first comments, because I always call out on basically if a character does something that's particularly silly, and like, if I was in that situation, why would I do that? And it was when he just injects himself with a plasmid.
Right.
I was like, why the heck would you, I get going down, exploring, going down the bathysphere, going into, I get that. But why would you grab a plasmid and stick it into yourself, or whatever that was? What he had no idea at that point. He's being told by Atlas that it's, would you kindly put that inside yourself, right, and inject yourself? And I was like, why the heck would you do that? It was a bit, I didn't understand it. As you going,
I don't think he. As crazy as it sounds, I don't think he prompts you on that one. You're just crazy.
He
pops
in after you inject yourself.
I mean, at the same time, like, it's kind of. I mean, again, being vague. The story can be as vague as it likes, because when he was told, "Would you kindly," in the plane, wasn't he? Right, and this could be like a part of the objective. Like, is to do that, right? So that's how I looked at it, is that everything he was doing, I think was intended. Everything he's doing, is because he was told to. I can't remember exactly. What was the main character's name again?
Jack.
Jack.
Yeah. Jack was told, was told on the plane to do something, and then was continually kind of buffed up, I guess, with the "would you kindly." And if folks don't know what I'm talking about, I don't want to go too into it because I want to give my other colleagues a chance, but basically our Jackie boy was mind controlled throughout the entire game. So that old cliche of, why are you climbing up that ladder? Why are you going further into like a danger zone? Why are you doing all these things? Like, a typical teen movie, you'd see in a typical teen movie, why would you go into that dark corridor? Well, this game has an answer for that. And I wasn't expecting that at all. I didn't know what to expect when that was announced. In terms of the story and the standouts for it, I did feel like, to go on a little bit of a downer, I did feel once you found out about Andrew Ryan and him having a little power trip in front of you, but then you eventually kind of clobbering him, which, by the way, can I just say, what a perfect way for me to end somebody is by hitting them with a wrench or a golf club, because that was my play style. But yeah, that really affected me, that bit, because Andrew Ryan, the way that guy acted that scene out, it was, because what I was getting was, he would, rather than admit that he didn't have control, because he was a complete control freak, like they all were, rather than admitting that he wasn't in control, he would rather die then admit that, which is why he like continually took the hits. I think that's what the game was trying to put forward. And this might be old theory stuff, like in the community. I don't know. I literally don't look at any of this stuff, as I said prior.
Right.
I just thought that was really cool. Because at first I was like, why are you doing this? And then when the game makes you think, and it's like, why would he do this though? He's been in control this entire time. And I felt after that, in terms of the story fell a little bit. I didn't like Fontaine very much. I didn't like that he turned into like a kind of Mr. Manhattan-esque like villain at the end. I loved the lead up to basically getting becoming a big daddy. I love that little egg hunt. But actually fighting him, there was an escort mission with a little sister that I didn't like very much either. I don't like it when at the end of a game, the game slows you down. And the game slowed right down towards the end. Yeah. Now, prior to all of that happening, we are being controlled by Atlas throughout the first half of the game. Maybe like first 1/5 of the game. Yeah, you know what I mean. First 3/4 of the game. Yeah. And, you know, all the way through it, I was like, I don't believe you. You're making me do all these things. We never see your wife or your kid. You know, I don't trust you. But for some reason, this is James thinking, for some reason, this character is constantly going to go through this. And I always have a faith in the process. And I think that is kind of testament to, like, you know, if you watch our Resident Evil podcast, you listen to our Resident Evil podcast or watch them, you see that as a part of my personality. I always give something a chance. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a chance. And I'm so happy I did. Because it really did surprise me. And someone almost spoiled me in the chat, didn't they, Burger, when I was playing it? And I didn't actually see what was put, but I was so tempted to look at that chat, but I'm so happy I didn't.
I'm glad you made it all the way through the game, you know. And yeah, it's quite impressive. Like,
to go 14 years without spoilers and then someone in chat put a spoiler in, I was like, no, must resist.
Right.
And as soon as I seen that, yeah, when like Atlas is going through all his bull crap, and then you get to that room where it just says, "Would you kindly?" It's just sent shivers down my spine.
Well, that's awesome. Then it like flashes back to all of the moments when it happens. Like, this is. I remember. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, I was done anyway.
I remember this thinking, I wish this was a game I could unplay.
Yeah, I bet.
Because of that reveal. And that's actually what I mentioned at the top of the chat. That I had a fun thing to talk about. While James was trying to play this one, while we were doing IP, we would talk about his BioShock journey and why he wasn't enjoying it or why he was having a bad time with it. And throughout that conversation, I would prompt him with, "Would you kindly tell me what you thought of that?" I did this for weeks.
You did that? I didn't even notice.
Weeks and weeks where I kept prompting him with,
I hate it.
"Would you kindly, like, to talk about BioShock specifically?" And then there was a moment during an episode of IP where one of the viewers in chat was like, "Oh, Burger said the thing!" And I was like, "No, you have to shut that down. Stop it. No, you do not ruin this for me, because when that podcast comes out and I get to say that I did this to James, it's going to make me so happy."
There you go, the itchy painty subplot of BioShock.
it's not as, you know, it's like my uwus every Sunday, Burger. I've been sneaking one every week. I don't know if you've noticed.
Oh, I haven't. Damn. it's uwu watch now.
It's a great moment. You're right. Like, I will talk about my feelings on the story at large, but that moment is so well directed. And James, I agree with you with the whole power control angle, because this is a guy who built an entire underwater city to get away from society because he thought he could do better. So I completely agree with you on that. Burger, sorry, do continue. Any thoughts on the story?
Absolutely. I have many.
You go right ahead.
So, I mentioned earlier, BioShock has like a visual storytelling aspect of like exploring the environment, educates Jack as to what's going on as it educates the player, which to me is one of my favorite things when games do. Another good example of it from a recent game is Control. Control, you walk into it as a character who just no idea what's going on. And as she learns what's going on, it educates you as the player, but it doesn't really hamper the experience. System Shock 2 did that to an extent. I think BioShock was a better version of it. Just in terms of, like, hearing stories unfold. As you're exploring this decrepit, decaying, falling apart underwater city, you find an audio log from, like, the chief engineer who's like, yeah, we gotta really worry about keeping these things sealed up, because I don't know if you know what happens when there's, 60,000 feet of ocean above us on a city that's underwater, and we have leaks. Like,
yeah,
that's real. Like, that's an encapsulation of that character's life in that moment. His exacerbation that he's not getting the parts he needs to make sure that the city's not leaking. Or, the subplot about the two parents who find their daughter has been turned into a little sister, and like them searching for it and fighting, and then you find them. You find their corpses, and they died together because they couldn't live without their little one. Seeing people's falling into madness. There's the one woman who she's present in the early part of the game. She ends up getting her face ruined by the plastic surgeon. She was dating Andrew Ryan.
Diane McClintock, I believe.
McClintock, yes, Diane McClintock. And like how she starts off with, "Oh, I'm going to be so pretty," but then her face gets ruined, she goes crazy, stuff like that. And then of course there's also the other characters who don't know what's going on. Andrew Ryan, when he first notices your presence, he thinks you're from the CIA. So for the first half of the game, he's like, "Oh, you're CIA spook, aren't you?" And then he starts to realize, he's like, "Oh, you're not from the CIA. Then who are you? What's going on?" And then there's James mentioned earlier, it's a game about foreshadowing, and I noticed that recently when James was doing his playthrough, there's an audio log you pick up where a guy talks about how the bathyspheres are all keyed to Andrew Ryan's DNA. So only people who are in Andrew Ryan's circle or their relatives can use the bathysphere. And you're able to use them just fine. So that was a nice bit of foreshadowing to kind of lead you in as the player. I will agree with James. I think the story kind of... I think they kind of blew their wad a little early in terms of there's a lot that happens after a man chooses, a slave obeys.
Right. Yeah. That
kind of takes away. I don't think it takes away from the impactfulness of that moment, but it's like watching the end of the Return of the King, right? You have your big moment, and then there's stuff that happens, and then there's stuff that happens, and then there's stuff that happens, and then by the time the end of the game, that big moment, that wonderful scene that you had, that visceral, oh my god, I've been played this whole time, is so distant.
Yes,
and
definitely.
And different depending on which of the endings you get. Of which I think there are 3.
Yeah, so you're saying there's 3 endings, right? All right, so I got the one which made me cry, actually. It was you go back down and you save all the little sisters, and then you come back up and then you watch them grow old and grow older, and then you grow older basically, and you're only seeing hands, you don't see any faces or anything. And then they basically hold your hand while you pass on, which I thought was so nice. so touching.
There's actually only 2 endings, but that is the good ending. And that only happens if you rescue all of the little sisters. So whether or not you meant to, that's what you did. So there you go.
I saved them all?
Apparently, because if you harvest one, then you get the other ending. I think that's pretty sure that's how it works.
Oh, I did. I definitely harvested one by accident.
I think you get a do-over, if I'm honest. I think because there's meant to be say 20 little sisters, and there's actually 21. I think the game counts.
Oh, right, okay.
So maybe it gives you a little buffer then.
Yeah, that's not an exact number, but something like that is a thing. I know people can harvest one and get away with it. Okay. You evil buggers.
So what's the bad ending then?
Oh, God.
You get condemned for your actions and all this stuff. And there's... Yeah, it's not good.
You come back
to nuclear missiles involved.
You come back to the surface with an army of splices and try and take on the world, and then rightfully get put back down for it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so it's the thing. Okay, I'm going to hold my tongue on this one. Steve, I'm going to throw to you. What ending did you get on this playthrough, and what do you think of the plot in general for BioShock?
I got the obnoxiously saccharine happy ending. I know James is happy with it, but 2 minutes of twee happiness was a bit too sickly for my taste after such a grimdark game. This is a game that I can keep replaying because there's always some other thread or some other little bit of knowledge to break out. It's got like a deeply built lore about a city that was built by basically a even more maniacal Walt Disney. Gets a sea slug that unravels everything, leads to civil war, and you, the player, initially think you're just BioShock guy. You're here to shoot things. And it turns out, no, you're actually central to the plot. You're the tycoon's 2-year-old son who's been rapid grown, brainwashed, and then turned into a gargantuan thing to kill him. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And the fact that most of the time, especially in the build-up before Andrew Ryan's confrontation and the game peaks and then rapidly slides downward, you're hearing about Andrew Ryan all the time. You're hearing about Frank Fontaine, who's apparently dead. You found one audio log from him and everyone else talking about how scary and how dead he is. And then he appears, like Kaiser Soze in The Usual Suspects, as the real villain. And then, unfortunately, you've killed the most compelling villain to then have to go up against evil wise guy Capone, who's developed an addiction to drugs. Now yous die, code yellow, the end. It's kind of rubbish, like that bit. As soon as Andrew Ryan dies, all the mystery and mythos of the game slowly peels away to just basically a boring shooter of you, superpowered lightning hand man with a wrench versus a mob boss, spelled BAWS. I would have rather have it, realistically, as much as I love all the stuff about Rapture, the Civil War, the madness of Steinman and Sander Cohen, and the general deconstruction of, I think it's Ayn Rand's philosophy, isn't it? The whole thing Andrew Ryan's about, the fact that he completely sells out. Like, he's all about freedom, but then brainwashes the entire populace to be his slaves and stuff like that. We throw that all out the window to take on a mob boss. So I'd rather.
It was very cookie cutter.
Yeah, like we had a really awesome villain. He dies and is replaced by a rubbish one. I would rather it have been the big reveal at the end is that little ding when Fontaine Futuristics takes over. Just game over. Just the you're looking out into the sea, so just have the glass explode and you die. That would have been a better ending than this saccharine save the world stuff. You've been played the entire time by Atlas, I think would have been, admittedly, this is before Spec Ops The Line and stuff did it, where it turns out you were a pawn or you were a villain all along. But it overstays its welcome. I'm not saying that the Umbrella-esque production line of the big daddies is not a fun thing to bounce around in Point Prometheus. It is. Becoming a big daddy and fishbowling my vision is garbage. And protecting the supposedly indestructible, but now for gameplay reasons not indestructible little sisters is garbage.
Yep.
And then the final boss is just like, what if we took away the compelling big daddies and made a lightning fire Iceman who's just talking like a 1940s comic strip at you as how he's going to take over the world and show them who's really in charge. It's kind of shit. It's like you've got Michelangelo's David and you're sweeping up and it looked fantastic, and at the top it's got like a clown wig on, at the end, just to ruin it. So yeah, my thoughts on BioShock's story is it's fantastic up until a certain point. It's got really interesting lore up until a certain point.
He looked like the figurine that was on the front of a Rolls Royce.
But no, I mean, Fort Frolic, yeah? Not to go really into the weeds for a second. Fort Frolic, there's this strip club you can go into. That's like, it's on signpost. There's no real lore there, or so you think. And there's like a dead woman on a bed. Turns out, if you really look into the weeds, that's your player character's mother who's dead there. The fact that, if you really look into it, you're a 3-year-old at best who's been fully grown and then turned into a monster to fight your own dad. Your own dad's given up and turned off the Vita chambers to keep him alive in his own room to teach you a lesson to try and be free, I think, maybe. Yeah. And then Frank Fontaine shows up.
I'm really glad that I'm not the only one with major issues with this story. And we've all kind of said the same thing about the sort of like latter missions. I agree, they can beat it. The final boss is despairingly easy. Yeah, the last sort of act of this game is very, very poor, which is very unfortunate because that moment is obviously so iconic and so legendary and so beloved. But after that, the game really does kind of like lose itself completely. Yeah, I've got lots of issues. Some of which, Steve, gladly you've already covered. You saved me the trouble for getting some hate mail, but I'm going to guarantee I get some more. Everyone loves BioShock because of the big you've not had control all along twist. I don't want to spoil another game, but Shadow of the Colossus came out the previous year and pretty much did the same thing. I know BioShock developers don't know that, but I'm just saying, it's the first game ever to do this. The gravity, the importance of the twist. Not really. In Shadow of the Colossus, you spend the whole game doing it and then you find out that you've been serving someone else's goal. And I'm sure it's not the first game to do it either. So I don't really understand. I don't remember having that feeling like when I found that out the first time. We're like, really? That's a shock. I was just kind of like, oh, okay. I don't really have a lot of feelings about the story in general. I like the world building stuff that you guys have mentioned. Steve, as you said, your mother on the bed, that's really weird and twisted and interesting. And Berger, you talked about getting the daughter turned into a little sister. That whole wing's very well done and emotional. But I don't care about Jack. That's the problem. I guess the reveal to me is I guess it sucks to be the player avatar. Anyway, time to keep playing the game and continuing to do the same thing until it gets rubbish and you get turned into a big daddy. Yeah, okay, you have lower HP for a bit afterwards. That's like a little gameplay change. But the actual game itself, it just kind of goes on after that. As you guys have said, it very much sullies the moment, certainly. I liked having the plasmids scrambled round. That was cool and refreshing for a moment. But then, kind of loses itself after that.
I want to comment on that a little bit and talk about an important aspect of just gaming as a hobby. The thing I think the fault with the ending, with that reveal that they give you, is it takes away all of your agency as a character, sure. As a player. It's like you kind of think you understand what's going on. You might not really understand, and you find out you've been played the whole time. I understand how that would it could make somebody feel put off, or like you said, it sucks to be Jack. I still don't care about him, but it does rob you of your why did I do all this? Oh, because somebody else wanted me to the whole time. So yeah, I agree. I will agree with that.
I can see why people think it's such a big deal because, of course, you're doing a bunch of objectives. You think you're just playing a video game and just that's what you do. You do the objectives and that's a big surprise. And sure, that's fine. But yeah, it's BioShock for me. It's one of those. It's difficult to feel anything about that because obviously the player avatar is literally meant to be a player avatar for that reason. But if that twist had come and some character I cared about in the story had been turned like that, then sure. But I don't really care about Jack. I care about some of the people in the files a hell of a lot more. So yeah, I agree that Rapture is super interesting, but the actual plot line I wasn't really that bothered about. I'm glad it switched itself up as it went because my first experience with the game way back in the day, I got really put off because the game introduces and it goes, here are the splicers. They're all crazy people. And I'm like, okay. And it goes, right, here's your boss. He's crazier than all the crazy people. And I'm like, okay. And then it goes, right, you killed the boss. Here's another one. Guess what? They're even crazier. And it does that 3 times. And I was like, is this the whole game? If I'd have carried on playing, it literally changes after that point, pretty much. But there's a string of that at the beginning where I'm like, right, okay, we get it. We got the crazy doctor. We got the and it's yeah.
And the scary part is that the psychopath, who's honestly a psychopath, Sander Cohen, is the only one who will optionally leave the player alone.
There is a so there was another criticism I had of the story, and it was I do like to be narratively driven in a game, and they, for some reason. And they said it's because they believed it was a more cinematic experience and a more immersive experience was there being no cutscenes in the game at all. And that was one thing. And I was like, okay, you got rid of the cutscenes. But at the same time, for a game that is terrifying at the beginning, this game it's got pretty good horror elements to it. Even towards the end, actually, I think there's one point where you get plasmid and you turn around and there's just a dude standing right in front of you. Terrified me. But like the biggest thing is you never out of cutscene meet anybody. Like face to face. I talk about it in Alien Isolation as well, that our podcast, go check that out. But the thing about horror games or games that kind of have a dark nature like this, you need brevity. And BioShock had brevity, it did, right? And you did speak to people, but it was always through a tannoy, or it was through glass, or like they were a distance away. I wanted to feel that human connection from Jack to like a character. And I at least, kind of similar to Ricardo in Alien Isolation, I at least wanted to have like some kind of relationship with these characters, that weren't Atlas or Andrew Ryan, because I needed somebody to kind of help me immerse myself. And that was something I struggled with at points. And I think if it wasn't for Berger, like I actually wouldn't have completed this game. And this was and I was actually prepared to say to you, I'll come on, but I didn't complete this because I just wasn't enjoying it, because there were certain points that weren't immersive to me. And I think that was one of them, is that I just wanted to meet people. All these notes are telling me that this place is full of people. Like this place was full of like folks, and there are were good people in this place, and we meet them barely and then they die. And it's like, I would have liked to have met them a little bit longer, kept me immersed, because it also would have helped you, Sai, because you also would have, I think you would have felt more connected to Jack.
Yeah.
Like as well, because it would have been more human, like he would have felt more humanized then.
Yeah. I'd say what you want about Ethan Winters, but at least he occasionally has a thing to say in Resident Evil 7. And I get, the point is that he's so blank slated that's why the twist works, because you just put yourself in the shoes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's why I think you're right. It doesn't work for me personally in that sense. And now that Steve has said essentially you're an aged up 3-year-old, I can't imagine Jack as anything but like a fully grown man with a baby's head. That doesn't help.
To that point, let's go ahead and start poking more holes in the storyline. The reason Jack never talked is because he probably can't speak because he's 3 years
right,
old.
exactly.
There is that opening
He's running around with a
line.
dummy in his mouth.
Can he even? Oh, in the opening of the
Mum
game.
and Dad said I was special, but that was an internal monologue. They didn't know how to speak yet. There we go, Bergs.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
Exactly. too busy sucking on his binky to speak.
Yeah.
Can he even comprehend the things people are telling him to do?
That's why he's bashing things with the wrenches.
Oh my goodness. We're diving into the moral implications
Oh,
of
wow.
BioShock right now.
Well, that's even more horror inducing.
And Among the
that's
Sleep
what horror
Child
was.
was the first game we played as a baby. Not so.
Yoshi's Island,
Right.
sir.
Let's move on to some conclusions then. Berger, let's start with you. You're a big BioShock fan. Where does it sit for you in the pantheon of your favourite games? Is it up there?
I would say that there was a time where I would have put BioShock in probably my top 5 favorite games.
Right.
It's 2007 was a long time ago, though. There's a lot of games that have come out since then. So I'm gonna say I'm hard pressed to put BioShock in my top 10. If only because I would put Prey on that list before BioShock at this point.
Right.
Just because I enjoyed Prey so much, and what it brought to the formula was enough for me to like, okay, so this is BioShock better. I think it is absolutely a foundational experience in what an explorative first-person shooter could be. In the vein of a game like... In an era where there was no Half-Life game to come out to kind of fill that void, and this kind of took that torch and like ran with it.
Yeah.
It was good. It aged well visually, but I think that ultimately speaking, I'm glad that it's over. And I'm glad that there doesn't seem to be any rumblings of a revival of the series, because I think it's one of those things that's best left as a relic or an icon of its age.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could see it either way. Obviously, I could see why there would be a fan demand for a remake. I'm sure that demand probably exists in certain parts of the internet, and obviously there are things you can improve in the remake and that kind of thing. But obviously, yeah, but at the same time, you're right. Perhaps we should look back on it as a moment in time, and yeah, I feel like you might kind of take the shine off if you try and update it too much. As much as I've got issues with it aging, I feel like that would probably take away some of its what makes it so great, what made it such an important part of gaming history. Steve, what are your final thoughts on BioShock?
Oh, there's a lot to compartmentalise. I've always appreciated what the Shock games try and do. Like, and this is someone who hasn't really put that much time into them. Like the concept of them and the way that they mechanically play out. BioShock in particular, and by Shock game I mean including the system ones, not just BioShock 1, 2 and Infinite. I think it's a good tentpole title for you to sink your teeth into, to a point. There are a lot of fetch questing and grinding that we haven't actually talked about, when it comes to using your photos and stuff to get your stats up. But overall, I'd say the positives generally outweigh the negatives if you're willing to caveat that the last fifth of the game is total arse and you should probably stop playing after Andrew Ryan dies. If I could say that a game is mostly good enough to justify that, that you can actually sever a portion of the game off and still have a great time, that probably says a lot. It's a cultural touchstone as well, visually and meme-wise. Would you kindly and a man chooses, a slave obeys will forever be BioShock and ingrained into my head. If you haven't played it before, seek it out, but be wary. There is some flecks of goo on that bronze statue you got.
Yeah, I'm glad that I did finally play it after my issues with it when it first came out, to see it a bit clearer and see what the full package actually is. It's going to sound really harsh, but now I'm able to justify my disinterest in it a little bit more because I can say I've actually played it all the way through and I've played the really important bits, especially rather than ducking out before they come. I'm really glad that people love this game. I know plenty of people that love this game. I just don't think it's for me. It is an important part in gaming history, so everyone says. I don't think it quite deserves the absolute worship that it gets, but you can certainly see that it's had an impact on narrative-driven first-person titles. Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know. Maybe context helps,
and that's okay. I think.
Yeah.
No, everyone has
absolutely.
to love every game universally on the podcast. We can all disagree.
Oh, absolutely. It's difficult because in 2022 it has been done better by this point, which we've established early on. But if you fancy yourself a gaming historian, then you should absolutely, of course, play this game at some point. And if you're a BioShock superfan, come at me with your pitchforks, I guess.
Definitely defend you. They're at Cyniac123 on Twitter.
Yeah, there's no underscore in there or anything. It's fine. James, this was your pile of shame pick. Are you glad you finally played it? What are your final thoughts on BioShock?
I am glad I played it. I still think that I wouldn't have played it. It's going to sound really harsh. I still think I wouldn't have played it if it wasn't for this podcast. Mm-hmm. But I'm glad I did.
Same, probably, by the way, just to say.
Yeah. But I am glad I did because now I understand, kind of the game and I can actually get the memes and I can get references and stuff to the, ones I could barely remember because I am just cotton wool in a suit. But yeah, I did like the game. It did some things that were kind of breakthrough for its time in terms of how the visuals of the game, the story. I had never seen a story like that before, personally. But I've got a lot of games in my pile of shame, so we can get through that at some point. But yeah, it was a good game. Like if I was going to give it a score, like moists out of 10, as we not always do, I would give it, a high 6 out of 10, like a 6.9, nice out of 10. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. There are definitely some things that could have been improved upon, and I think it should be applauded for its time, for a game, for what it did. But yeah, I just feel like I still wouldn't play. Because like you, it's not my kind of game. I know that sounds weird, and I'm always like, yeah, you should give things a try at least once. And I did give this game a try, and so did Sai, right? But just overall kind of the style of the game and the first-person aspect of it, it didn't really mesh with me. The story did, and like the visuals of the game did. But I think the gameplay was kind of my main caveat of it, and some immersive points of the game, and the audio was kind of, wild.
Well, nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors and our Patreons once again, and support the show for as little as $1 a month to help us create more bonus content like this one over at patreon.com/FASprayPod. You can also join the Discord server to get in touch with members of the team and our community, discuss Resident Evil with us and other fans, and listen to the podcast live as it's being recorded. You can find a link to the server, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, and more at faspraypod.com. You can find the podcast on YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes, and if you enjoyed the show, please do leave us a review where you can. It helps spread the word. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all of the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Cyniac_123, Steve is at FB Steve Was Taken, James is at Moist Owlet OFF, and Burger is at It's Burger Time. And finally, thank you for listening, and would you kindly have a good week?
Yes.
Oh,
Nice. Nice.
podcaster entitled to the sweat of their brow? No, says the man.
It's mine. No, says the person in the admin chat.
It belongs to the CEO.
No, says the fifth beetle, it belongs to everyone.
No, says the Patreon backers.
Choose
yeah, Patreon backers. What do you say?